Welcome to Inside Israel, everybody. It is August 11th, 2024, and I'm coming to you from Ra'anana, where I've been all summer. The title of tonight's episode, actually, it doesn't have a title, and let me explain why. It's actually kind of exciting what's going on right now. The format of the podcast is changing. I'm not sure if any of you listened online on Apple or Spotify to last week's pod, but it was totally produced with music at the beginning and the ends and end credits where I thank the production staff, transitions throughout. Sounds really good. It's actually like a real podcast now. I'm proud of it. And moving forward, these Sunday night broadcasts are always going to happen. However, they're not all going to run online on Apple and Spotify as that week's podcast. For example, this week, if you listen on Apple and Spotify, you will not hear this. You will hear an interview with a soldier named Yoav Cohen. Yoav Cohen is in his late 30s. He works at a high-tech company, a pretty well-known one. He's got a wife, 3 kids. But since October 7th, he's spent over 100 days serving in the reserves, and he just got called up for more. And so I sat down with him in a studio and interviewed him about what that is like. What's the impact of all of this reserve duty service on his family, on his children, one of whom has PTSD because of his leaving so often and because of the trips to the bomb shelter and the sirens. So even though you are here tonight with me for this webinar version of Inside Israel, I really, really encourage you to listen to the audio podcast that's going to go up online this week on Apple and Spotify because it's completely different. And you'll hear that interview with Yoav and get some real insights into what it's like to be a reservist and what it does to your family life and your work life when you're called away for, over 3 months at a time and now being called up again. So this week's podcast online is different from what you're seeing tonight. Next week, it's going to happen to be exactly what you see on Sunday night. But then after that, it's going to be another interview. So that's sort of how it's going to be. It's going to be staggered. These live Sunday night ones are always going to happen. We might change the day of the week once I go back on tour in the fall, but you'll always have a live one every week. But the ones that are online on Apple and Spotify may or may not correspond. So if you're not subscribed there, you really should. And there's an easy way to do it on my website, joelchasanoff.com/podcast, which I just put in the chat. You'll see buttons for Apple and Spotify. So whichever one you prefer to get your podcasts, just look for Inside Israel with Joel Chasanoff. The link is directly there on my site. Subscribe there, and you won't miss anything. Some of the other interviews I've done that are going to run in the next few weeks. I talked to Susan Weiss, who is the executive director for the Center of Women's Justice here in Jerusalem. Just today, I interviewed a cultural trainer named Osnat Lautman, who really dissects the Israeli personality, for better and for worse. I interviewed Amanda Borschel-Dan. If any of you listen to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing podcast, which is actually the #1 English language podcast about Israel in the world, I interviewed her about what it's like to be the host of that and how her world has changed since last October, now being really the voice of Israel for so many of us. And others I've interviewed as well. So to stay tuned to all that, go ahead to my website right now and subscribe through the buttons that you see there. As for what I want to do tonight with you, I thought that I really owe it to you to give you some slices of life of what's happening here in Israel right now. It's an extremely chaotic time for us. I don't know how Israeli life is being presented in the news media in America. I would imagine it's not really being presented at all. I would imagine what they're talking about is hostage talks and whether or not there's going to be a truce. And I know there's a lot of headlines about Israel's bombing of a school or attack of a school in Gaza, which in my opinion is complete and utter, once again, pardon my French, bullshit, because we know for a fact right now that Hamas is operating in humanitarian zones in Gaza. And in a way, this is good news. It means that they are really on their last legs. They're very close to crumbling. The word out of intelligence right now in Israel is that Sinwar, who is the new head of Hamas's political wing, as well as its military wing, wants a ceasefire because Hamas is so close to being decimated. But the truth is that Hamas now is operating out of humanitarian zones, which is completely against the law. And by law, if your enemy is operating in a hospital or out of an ambulance or a humanitarian zone or a school, that makes that location a legitimate target. If anyone in the world paid any attention to international law or gave two shits about what actually is allowed and isn't, they would know this. They would know that this is the truth. And the United States has always operated according to these same rules as well. No one has ever called them out for taking the actions they've done. It's an Israel thing. But that's the attention that Israel is getting right now in the media. What is not getting covered is how Israelis are living day to day. So I want to give you a few slices of life. I don't want to mince words here. Israelis are getting really frustrated. We're exhausted. We, in many ways, feel like we're living day to day. And only because of us, the civilians, is the country holding itself together. Let's look at where we are right now. We are now 10 months out from October 7th, 10 months, and we still have 115 hostages in Gaza. And I got to tell you, we don't even talk about those hostages the way we used to. Some of that energy in our conversation is missing. It's gone. I don't want to say that we've accepted that there are hostages there and given up, but there's only so long you can hold on emotionally and still have it salient and still haven't feel like a robust part of your emotional life before it starts to fade away. And we're at a point right now where over 10 months we've had hostages there. And at the same time, the Knesset just went on vacation. That's right. Our government, the Knesset, the parliament here in Israel, elected to go on a vacation, not just a short 2-week summer vacation. This is a vacation that will last until after the high holidays, so through the end of Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And yes, special committees will supposedly come back to debate and discuss issues related to the war and hostage talks, etc. But the idea that we have 115 hostages in Gaza and our government feels it's okay to take a 2.5-month vacation, it's just really disheartening to a lot of us Israelis and adds to the feeling of absolute frustration that so many of us are feeling right now. The violence against us continues. On the one hand, we have, 80,000 Israelis who are still not living at home. They are still displaced from their homes in the north and some in the south, 10 months out. There's another type of violence. Just today, a 23-year-old named Jonathan Deutsch was killed when he was driving on Highway 90 in a violent attack. He was killed with an assault rifle, and an Arab Israeli in another car was injured in that same attack. Now, you have to realize that Likud and the right wing and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of Police in particular, campaigned on the slogan Mikan Balabait, meaning who's actually in charge of this place? Whose country is it? And his whole campaign was based on the idea that finally, once and for all, I will make Israel safer for the Jews. And what we've seen is more Jews by far killed on his watch than any other government in the history of the state of Israel. And so there's just this frustration among us, not to mention the fact that we are expecting literally any day to be attacked by Iran or Hezbollah. The latest word on the street is that this attack is coming this week. Nobody knows exactly when, but we keep getting updates not to change any of our habits, that the army is saying, go about your daily lives, despite the fact that we are expecting this attack any day now. So every day we wake up, we wonder, is this going to be the day that we are attacked by a barrage of missiles, or that one of our leaders is going to be assassinated? There's also been intelligence that Iran has changed its mind. Instead of attacking military targets or civilians, instead it's going to try to take out one of our leaders. The same way we took out the head of Hamas's political wing, they're going to try to take out Netanyahu or some other high-level political leader, which would spin the entire country, obviously, and the region into chaos. So we wake up, and I'm telling you, literally, we wake up every day, and I say to myself, I don't know, is this going to be the day that we are attacked by Hezbollah or Iran or proxies or all of them or just one of them? It's not a way to live. And this is also the time of year when we're supposed to take off. You know, Israel's a stressful place to live, but August is the one month where a lot of Israelis try to go away. And don't get me wrong here. My family's lack of a summer vacation is nothing compared to what other families are going through, God forbid, who have their loved ones in Gaza or have lost a family member or a loved one in the war or in an attack. But you do got to realize that thousands and thousands of Israelis, had summer plans to go away with their family for 5 days to Cyprus, to Greece, to somewhere in Europe. And those trips are now canceled because the airlines aren't flying. We have Israelis, thousands of Israelis trapped outside of Israel who cannot get back into the country because flights have been canceled. So we're all kind of in this limbo, living day to day and wondering what the next day is going to be like. It's a very difficult time to live here. And we don't feel like we have any leaders who are actually looking out for us and trying to make our lives better. The people who are keeping the country afloat are the civilians, the citizens, the people, I would say, like me and everyone else, but I'm so low on the totem. It really is all these other people who are doing volunteer work, who are making sure that the country keeps on running, who are working without salary, just to make sure that the country doesn't fall apart. So if you were to ask me what are Israelis talking about right now, it's what is today going to be like and what is tomorrow going to be like? It is quite literally one day at a time. So a few news stories related to that. One of the big news items going around Israel this week was that the attack from Iran was going to happen on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And when I heard this, my first thought was, man, I didn't even realize that the 9th of Av was coming up. And I had to check and look up and see that, oh, the 9th of Av is August 12th at sundown and August 13th. And a lot of Israelis were like that too. We weren't even thinking about Tisha B'Av until we heard that Iran was thinking of attacking us on Tisha B'Av. And it sort of says something to me that our enemies really seem to be on top of the Jewish calendar in a way we never expected. They certainly know when Yom Kippur is. They knew when Sukkot and Simchat Torah were last fall. And, in a way, that sort of dark humor about how our enemies are starting to know our calendar better than we do. But there's something really poignant about that idea. And I think it's a metaphor for Israel's take on our enemies. For a long time, we've dismissed our enemies as a bunch of ragtag wannabes who had Molotov cocktails and who tried to dig tunnels, but we would always stop their tunnel digging at the last moment and foil their plans, and they could never really attack us. And lo and behold, we need to acknowledge that our enemies have been very smart and very clever, and in a way, one step ahead of us. And part of it is our own failure to pick up on the intelligence that was right before our own eyes. But this idea that they are aware, not just of the Jewish calendar, but they are aware of our pain points. They're aware that attacking us on October 7th, that was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And I think that was lost on a lot of Israelis, including those highest up in intelligence. I think we thought the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War would have been Yom Kippur of 2023. We sort of forgot that it could be the Gregorian date of October 7th, 2023, and we overlooked that, and yet our enemies were on top of it. So on the one hand, it's kind of absurd that our enemies know when Tisha B'Av is, and yet so many of us here in Israel didn't realize it until we heard we were going to be attacked on Tisha B'Av. But it also represents a bit of a disconnect between where we're vulnerable and our enemies do know where we are vulnerable. So that was one big news story happening in Israel this week. Just the idea that Tisha B'Av might be the day when we are attacked, adding yet one more level of sorrow and grievance to Tisha B'Av. Look, in 48 hours, we'll know whether or not that came true. Obviously, we all hope it doesn't. God forbid that it would. But Tisha B'Av does start tomorrow night here in Israel, and obviously on your time tomorrow night, wherever you are. Second big news story, there is talk of a hostage deal right now. And I got to tell you, this is the most optimistic I have ever felt myself, and also the most optimism I've ever heard about a potential hostage deal along with a ceasefire. The story is that on Thursday, Israel is sending a delegation to Cairo. Hamas, within, I think, a few hours ago, just announced that it is not sending a delegation. Instead, they're going to have mediators go to Cairo to try to work out a deal. And this is seen by Israel as some sort of stalling tactic, a strategic tactic by Hamas. Despite this, there is a lot of optimism that this deal will finally get done. What we're hearing in the headlines here is that the talks will begin on Thursday, and as early as next week, it can begin to be implemented. And there's a few reasons why people are optimistic. Number one is that apparently Sinwar, as I mentioned before, does want a deal, that Hamas is close to being completely decimated, and that his only chance for survival is to have some sort of agreement, a ceasefire. But here's what I think happened. I'm going to give you Joel Chasnoff's opinion on what went down behind the scenes. I think Israel took out these two leaders. When was it? A week ago? 10 days ago already. The head of Hamas's political wing and the top commander in Hezbollah. Within 24 hours, Israel took those two out. The United States did not know about these eliminations. When it found out, Biden was upset. This is known. Biden was upset. The U.S. was upset when it found out about these. It had wanted Israel to tell it ahead of time of any such action. I have a feeling that Biden and the U.S. said to Israel and Netanyahu, okay, you took out these two leaders. It's a given that you are going to be attacked in retaliation by Iran, by Hezbollah, possibly both. We will back you up. We will send ships to the Mediterranean. We will make clear to Iran that if they take action against you, that we will support you and take action against Iran. However, Bibi, however, Israel, in exchange for that, you are going to finalize a deal that calls for a ceasefire and hostage release within the next 2 weeks. That's what's going to happen. And that's what I think actually went down behind the scenes, that the US gave Israel an ultimatum and said, we will support you against Iran and Hezbollah. However, your part of the bargain is you get this deal done, because Biden and the administration are, I think, justifiably fed up with the fact that there isn't a deal already, and with Netanyahu specifically. A lot of Israelis, I'm not alone, the majority of Israelis believe we could have had a deal already were it not for Netanyahu. Even his own negotiators on the negotiating team are saying that several times he has nixed a possible deal at the last minute, that they came back ready with a deal that would have released hostages, but he then changed his mind and implemented new conditions. So it's not just Joel saying this. This is what most Israelis feel. And I think the Americans also are fed up with it, and that they gave Bibi an ultimatum and said, we'll back you up, but only on the condition that you get this deal done. And that is why I think that this time it might actually happen. I don't think you've ever heard me say that before on this podcast, that I actually believe a deal will get done. This is the first time. Will it be done by the time we meet next Sunday? Doubtful. I think we'll know more. I don't think it'll be signed by then. But I'm now starting to think that we will not reach October 7th, 2024 without the deal having been done. I do think that by October 7th, the 1-year anniversary, most, if not all, the hostages will be out. I hope so. All Israelis do. The third little slice of life news story I want to share with you has to do with El Al, the Israeli airline. And there's no other way to put this except to state it bluntly that El Al, they are thieves. They are absolutely taking advantage of the situation to make as much money as possible. As we say in Hebrew slang, hem chalerot. They're disgusting what they're doing to the people here. You can look online right now and see what flights cost to go to Israel, to get out of Israel. And it's usually in the $1,600, $1,800 range until you look at El Al. I actually need to go to the US within a week or two for some personal business, and El Al tickets start at $5,000 round trip. Now, someone actually wrote me today, because I wrote in our newsletter that one of the things I'll be talking about is El Al's price gouging. And he said, actually, if you look at other, the history of this is El Al's tickets are always a bit higher at this time of year. Well, that's not true. And here's how I know why. Here's how I know that something else is going on. I have a friend who works with a major Jewish organization, which I will not name, but he has 30 teenagers coming to the United States over the next month to do a semester here in Israel. And they bought their tickets for these students a year ago on El Al. This past week, El Al phoned him and they offered to buy his tickets back at 1.5 times the price that he paid. Now, why would El Al want 30 seats on a flight to Tel Aviv, 30 seats that belong to teenagers from the US? And why would they want them so badly that they'd pay 1.5 times the price? Well, obviously, you know what the answer is, because they can take those 30 seats and sell them at 5 times the normal going rate. And this is another reason why we Israelis feel completely abandoned. El Al is the national airline. It is supported by the government. It is the airline of Israel. And instead of stepping in, instead of saying, hey, we've got your back, we're going to make it easy for Israelis outside the country to get back to Israel. We're going to make it easy for those Israelis who really need a vacation after all they've been through these past 10 months to get that small break with their family. Instead, they are jacking up the prices like chalerot and taking advantage of the Israeli people. And so a lot of Israelis are priced out because of El Al. And that's just one more frustration that so many Israelis are feeling right now. We're going to go to a couple questions from you guys. We had 2 questions come in this week, and both are really relevant and poignant. So the first one's from Lisa in Ann Arbor. Lisa said that she's a day school teacher in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So great to hear from a day school teacher. Respect. I went to day school myself, and I am who I am because of day school. And that's a good thing, I think, overall. That's a compliment to day school. So Lisa writes, I heard that the Knesset designated a day for the memorial of the Hamas attack, not as October 7th, but on the day after Simchat Torah. Do you think that Israelis will observe that day as the memorial, or will all 3 of those days be memorials, meaning Simchat Torah and October 7th and the day after Simchat Torah? So first of all, Lisa, you are correct. The Knesset actually decided to designate the memorial of last fall's horrific attack as the day after Simchat Torah. It took place on October 7th, which is Simchat Torah. However, they didn't want to make Simchat Torah a day of mourning, so instead the day after Simchat Torah will be designated as the Memorial Day. I have said this before. I think this is actually the wrong decision to make it the day after Simchat Torah. And the reason is we have been calling this October 7th or Shvi'i Be'October here in Israel. That's how we refer to it. Shvi'i Be'October, the 7th of October. That's how we've been referring to it for the past over 10 months. There is no way that October 7th of 2024 is going to come around and we are not going to realize that it is the 1 year anniversary of the atrocity. And that's true for every year going forward. There's no way that October 7ths are going to come to us in the years down the road and we will be able to treat it as a normal day because we know the memorial is the day after Simchat Torah. And yet that is what the Knesset voted. And by the way, this isn't the first time that we've taken a completely secular date and turn it into the memorial into the Hebrew date. When Rabin was assassinated, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think it was November 5th of 1995. And that's the day in most Israelis' minds as the anniversary of Rabin's assassination. But in terms of the commemoration of Rabin's assassination, it's the Hebrew date associated with November 5th, 1995. And I couldn't even tell you what that is. And I assure you, most Israelis cannot even tell you what that date is. So you lose something, I think, when there's a clearly Gregorian date that is then memorialized according to the Hebrew calendar. So what do I think is going to happen, Lisa? I think for sure we're going to commemorate it on October 7th, whether the government designates it as a day of mourning or not. But I think we will also commemorate it on the day after Simchat Torah because it's the national day of mourning set aside for it. And I think we're also going to remember it on Simchat Torah as well. I don't know that Simchat Torah will be the same for the next probably 3 or 4 years. I could see that 10 years from now, Simchat Torah goes back to being a normal date. Once October 7th and the day after Simchat Torah have sort of been accepted as the official memorial days. But for this year and probably the next, I imagine that all three of those will be the day we set aside for remembering. That's a good question, Lisa, and a little bit of insight into what happens when you have a country that lives according to both calendars. Mitch from Connecticut writes, how do Israelis celebrate or commemorate is probably the better word, Tisha B'Av? He writes, in Israel 201, you wrote about Yom Kippur bike rides. Is it a similar situation on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av? So if you don't know what Mitch is talking about, if you haven't read Israel 201, well, you really should. But in Israel 201, my co-author and I, Benji Lovett, talk about all these tiny minutiae, all the tiny aspects of Israeli life that a lot of people don't know about. And one of them is that Yom Kippur in Israel is a lot of kids' favorite day of the year. And the reason is on Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur, nobody drives in Israel. There's no law against it. It's just sort of this beautiful national agreement that nobody drives a car on Yom Kippur. And this means the streets are empty. So it's actually a bike holiday for a lot of kids in Israel. And I must add, a lot of adults, a lot of hardcore bike riding adults will get up at the crack of dawn on Yom Kippur and do a bike ride from Haifa to Tel Aviv or Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because the highways, the streets are completely empty. So what Mitch is asking is Tisha B'Av commemorated in the same way? So first of all, it is not. There are only two full fast days in the Jewish calendar. One is Yom Kippur, one is Tisha B'Av. But Yom Kippur in the Torah is referred to as a Shabbat type of holiday. So no lighting fire, no work, etc. Tisha B'Av is a normal day of the week. You can turn on lights, you can drive a car, you can engage in commerce. So the whole bike riding phenomenon does not happen on the 9th of Av. However, stores, a lot of stores, most stores are closed. Health clubs, movie theaters, any place of recreation, those are going to be closed. And certainly most restaurants are closed as well. Now, you will have grocery stores open here and there. You will have little kiosks open where you can go in and get food. And I wouldn't be surprised if some non-kosher restaurants are also open. And when I say non-kosher, you got to realize non-kosher in Israel means something completely different. You know, when I was living in the US, my concept of kosher was kosher meat and not mixing milk with meat. But in Israel, it really takes on a different meaning. A restaurant can be vegan. There are vegan restaurants in Tel Aviv that are not kosher. Why are they not kosher? Because they're open on Shabbat, or they have somebody not Jewish who is the first one to turn on the flame on the stove in the morning. There's apparently a very small Jewish law that whoever is the first to turn on the flame needs to be Jewish. And if that person is not Jewish, then that place is not kosher. So some of those restaurants might be open on Tisha B'Av. If you're hungry on Tisha B'Av, you can certainly find a place to buy food. But most businesses do shut down, certainly anything associated with recreation. And then you have religious people who fast, modern Orthodox or conservative Jews, maybe even some Reform who would fast. But they also would go to work that day. So they wouldn't necessarily take the day off from work. So it's sort of a mixed day. It's sort of an in-between day where you kind of feel like it's a holiday, like there's something different happening, and yet it's certainly not the vibe of Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, but not even the vibe of Shabbat, because you see normal traffic and you see kids in parks and playgrounds. So you don't get the full take that this day is different. Now, one thing we do in Ra'anana, and this might be true in a lot of towns in Israel, is that there's a big reading of Eicha. It's traditional to read the book of Eicha. I believe it's translated as Lamentations. Someone let me know if that's right. But I always remember from summer camp going to Camp Ramah that we would sit on the ground in the Beit Ha'am and read Eicha back. We'd sit back to back because you're not on chairs because it's a day of mourning. And something similar happens here in Ra'anana. There is a communal reading of Eicha. And what's actually beautiful is a lot of people who are not religious, who are not Orthodox, attend that just for the sense of community and just for the sense of being together. And I personally plan to attend that tomorrow night. We already saw them setting up for it today in Yad Labanim, the big square in the middle of town, in the middle of Ra'anana. So thank you for those questions. And I want to thank all of you for joining tonight's episode of the webinar episode of Inside Israel. Again, what you hear online on Apple and Spotify this week will be completely different. You really should subscribe and tune in because it's a fascinating interview with Yoav Cohen, who is in Magav, the Mishmar HaGvul, the border police, did over 100 days of reserve service. And he's going to tell us what that was like, the impact of that on his family, on his work. How do you maintain a job when you're gone for that period of time? And what is the impact of that on Israeli society overall? I put the link above, but I'm going to go ahead and put it one more time. It's www.joelchasnoff.com/podcast. You can get the links there to go directly to Apple and Spotify. The video of this, if you know someone who wants to watch it, this will be up on my website by tomorrow night. So within 24 hours, this video will be up there. Keep your questions coming. Your questions, I love them, and they're also what keeps this fresh and interesting every week. You can send those to joel@joelchasnoff.com or just go to the website link I sent you and contact me there. Next week's Inside Israel will take place, Be'ezrat Hashem, God willing, on August 18th. That's a week from tonight at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, the links and the info will go out on Thursday in the newsletter. Hebrew is Magic. If you're not signed up for that, well, you really got to sign up for that as well. Same link as before. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, everyone. I'll leave the chat open for a few more minutes so you can hang out before I close it off. May we all have a safe week. If you're fasting, an easy and safe fast. Start drinking water now so you don't dehydrate in the heat. And may we get through this 9th of Av with no more additions to the reason we have the 9th of Av, right? Amen. Laila Tov, everyone.